live studio analysis of President Buhari's budget presentation with us here at our headquarters in Lagos. Yomi Olugbenro, who is a partner and West Africa tax lead at Deloitte, Nigeria. Yomi, thank you so much for being here. And joining us within the presentation by Mr. President is Andrew Nevin, a partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Andrew, thank you so much.
Delighted to be here.
We appreciate that. This gentleman will be doing justice to what Mr. President says, trying to drill down on these numbers and what it means for the economy moving forward. Then, of course, from our Abuja studios, Tafa Abraham, who is a financial and development economist, is live in our Abuja studios, as well as Eze Oyepere, who is the lead director at the Center for Social Justice. Two of them will also be joining us when they're done with the feed from the National Assembly. But gentlemen, here in Lagos, Andrew, it's good to have you here. What strikes you as very unique in what Mr. President says at this budget presentation? What are the line items for you?
Well, let me start with four positives to get us going. I mean, I think one positive, it is a great exercise of democracy in Nigeria to have the executive branch come to the legislature, present the budget in the way it was done, as the Speaker of the House said. I think secondly, both the Speaker of the House and the President, so both branches are saying very clearly the objective is to lift 100 million people out of poverty. And that objective is clear. The Nigerian people can hold them to that. And in addition, I think it was very important that the legislative side said we're going to work hand in hand with the executive in achieving these goals. And I think the fourth positive that I took away today is that the budget was presented in October, so we can get back to having the budget ready before 2020. So I think those are the positives I took away today.
I can almost predict what Yomi Olugbenro must have noted down when it comes to tax. And this is going already, put a bit of it out on Twitter, and folks are saying, look, this looks like great news if the threshold of 25 million naira is set for companies when it comes to the new VAT.
No, absolutely. So I'm actually delighted at the fact that this budget presentation is very heavy on the revenue side. For a number of the years in the past, we have numbers reeled out in terms of what the capital proposal will be, what the recurrent estimate will be, and we spend just a little less of a time for focus on how to finance it. So a whole lot of positives for me, one being the fact that a lot more attention was paid to how the revenue is going to be derived. The highlight of this presentation for me, it's actually the reintroduction of the finance bill. We last had this during the military era. Now, the appropriation bill is coming together with the finance bill to give legal backing to the increment of the VAT from 5 to 7.5. And I'm delighted to know that a number of the issues that many of us have raised regarding what needs to go together with the VAT increase have now been introduced, and I'm hoping it's going to be passed. So registration threshold is now been introduced so that the very small and micro businesses can be shielded from some of the impact. We've also seen that the exemption list had been expanded to actually include more necessities so that the very low and vulnerable can actually be protected. So a whole lot of that, and if you just oppose that with the fact that it was timely presented, we're returning back to the January-December cycle. The executive-legislature relationship seems to be at its best in the recent past. So I think we actually look forward to a fantastic 2020. I think 2020 will define the legacy of President Muhammadu Buhari, because it's going to have, in addition to having an early passage of the budget, 1.5 years, of budget to run in 2018. Remember that the 2019 budget is overlapping, and this current year is only going to be ending by end of June. So 2020 for me looks like the year we've been waiting for.
Andrew, do you think this is more of a realistic budget if you look at the size of the appropriations, education, healthcare, tax, power, and what have you, except 1 or 2, 3 items, the rest are in double digits of billions of naira with the exception of power, even except, well, defense if you add that. So do you think this is a lot more realistic in terms of the numbers?
Well, I've said some positive things. Let me say some challenges that we come up. We put these numbers up. If you take the health and the education number together, it's 100 billion naira. Now, if my math is correct, that's 500 naira per person in Nigeria. So how much education, how much health care are we going to get for that amount of money? For the population we have, these are tiny, tiny numbers. And I think that where what we don't see in this budget is what the speaker said at the end. He said it's a time for bold action. So we've said for years we need to grow 6 to 8% a year to make any difference to poverty, make any difference to unemployment. So 6 to 8% a year requires total investment, private sector and public sector investment of 40 trillion naira a year. The public sector under the budget is investing about 2 trillion naira in infrastructure, so 5% of the total. So the question is not is what the government's investing, it's is it creating the conditions for the other 38 trillion naira to be invested? And so far for the past number of years, that hasn't been the case. So we've only grown 2%, 1.9%. Is this budget going to unlock that? And I'm not sure it is. And just to give one highlight of it, what I found about this budget was it was, again, unwilling to take any structural action. So you look at the MDAs. We have too many MDAs. They create complexity. They create cost for the private sector investment. So the private sector investment doesn't come. So rather than say, what is the structural issue with the MDAs, what the president said in this budget was we're going to be punitive to MDAs for going over their budgets. And I'm not sure that's going to be the right approach.
So we're going to ask you a few more questions, gentlemen. We have to the top of the hour to continue this conversation, drilling down on Mr. President's budget proposals to the Joint National Assembly. But again, trying to find the key levers for delivering this 2020 appropriations. Let's cross over to Abuja studios. Tafa Abraham is standing by, as well as Eze Oyekwere. Thank you, gentlemen, for being there. Tafa, let me ask you, what is the big story for you in this budget presentation proposals to the National Assembly?
Thank you both. For me, the big story for me is I was glad to hear the president say that they are going to sustain the tempo of the ARGP. In other words, there will be another medium-term plan that will guide government program implementation for 2020 up to 2023. I was so glad to hear that. It was something we anticipated before he went on with that speech. Then again, I'm also happy to hear the green angle to the budget. I was happy to hear when the president mentioned about the Sukuk funding, the green bond funding, and the diaspora bond. The green bond is a climate change finance option, and it's good to know that in this context of sustainable development goals up to 2030, that the part of government finances will be coming from green bonds, which is the green angle perspective. I'm also happy to see that the top 6 sectors, which is works and housing, power, transportation, UBE, defense, and zonal intervention, are also reflected in the ARGP. And I'd just like to quickly add a quick one to, I think it was Andrew from the Lagos studio that made mention. It's true that when you add the education and health, you get about 100 billion. But again, remember that UBE is part of education. So, and the UBE had an allocation of 123 billion. So if you throw in 123 billion to what Andrew, I think from Lagos, made about adding it to health and education, you see that even at that, there's a lot of plans in this budget to carry, to curb the incidence of out-of-school children, bring inclusive growth for excluded groups. So I think for me, the big angle generally is the inclusive angle to the budget. And lastly, Boston, if you spare me, in the past, we are used to see the budget just have a central theme, budget for this, budget for consolidation. But this time around, if you notice, the president has 3 sub-themes for the budget to signify that this budget will be one that will be dynamic in terms of implementation. What we are just waiting for now is to see how we go back to the January 1st to December 31st budget calendar, and that will be powerful.
Okay, I'm going to ask Eze. Thank you, Tafa. But let me ask Eze about these four broad structures of the budget that Mr. President talked about, drilling down on a social investment program to deepen the impact on Nigerian people, fiscal consolidation, infrastructure investment, and incentivizing the private sector to support the federal government. And that's what Andrew Nevis spoke about. How do we get the private sector here to support this government? Because whichever way you look at it, this money is not enough for 200 million people.
Is that for me?
Yes, that's for you, Eze Oyekwere.
I've just lost the audio. But if you look at the budget, roughly not more than $30 billion, and divide it for 200 million Nigerians, you will roughly be getting about $150. And that's just about 54,000 naira per person, if you look at it at 360 to 1 USD. So that's not sufficient. I think that beyond the figures we see in the budget, just like was pointed out, we need to see more structural reforms that will bring out the power of the private sector, that will leverage on other capital that the government cannot bring out. We need to see more figures like, if you are talking about healthcare, we need to have comprehensive and compulsory health insurance. If we're talking about housing, we need to make sure the mortgage sector is working. The National Housing Fund has to be re-energized, and other sectors of the economy. So it's not just these paltry figures that we have here that will push us to grow, begin to grow back at, say, 6 to 8% per annum. And that's the kind of growth we need to bring Nigeria back to where it should be. But I'm happy that we are going to go back to the yearly calendar of January to December. But the implication, if you look at what they have talked about, we've done in capital expenditure, means that by the end of the year, we may not do more than 800 to 900 billion in terms of spending on capital for the year. And also, we're a little bit worried that for the first time, it appears that the money budgeted for debt servicing is now higher than that budgeted for capital expenditure. You know that even in the capital expenditure, we only spend on capital when we have finished spending for recurrent and other sources. So the little that is remaining is what is spent on capex. But today, we have a situation where from the beginning, the money for debt servicing is higher than that for capex. So it will create a lot of challenges going forward that if we are not so sure of where the money is coming from, there will be challenges in funding capital expenditure. Particularly, if you look at the funding sources, they talked about restructuring of the joint venture, cash calls, the money that the assets they want to sell off. We had it in 2018, we had it in 2019 budgets, and nothing exactly happened. So we don't know exactly how this will happen in 2020 going forward. And so there are a lot of challenges that we see, but the important thing is that let that commitment and that political will be there, and then all things may work out.
Thank you, Eze, but speaking specifically to fiscal consolidation and investment in infrastructure, Andrew, coming back to you, how do you think this will work within this? It looks like Mr. President laid out the figures, but it looks like the budget spoke to a broader economy. Is that what you see here from this presentation?
Well, as we said before, even if the federal government invests 2 trillion naira in infrastructure, we need a lot more infrastructure. So there's nothing wrong with the 2 trillion naira. I think it'll be focused in the right places. I think the federal government needs to show the programs can get executed and can completed in a timely fashion. But we need to crowd in this private capital. So we need to make the structural changes that are going to crowd it in. Also, I think there's no question we do need to have some privatization. I mean, I think whether it's airports, whether it's railroads, whether it's other kinds of infrastructure, it's only the private sector that has the capital to drive that. So I think that one institution that's very critical for us over the next few years is ICRC, so the concessioning body run by Engineer Jide, which is run very well. But we need to crowd in that private capital.
Investment capital. How do we get it in, Andrew? You have any idea?
Well, the biggest message I want to give is less complexity and less cost. So why do people not want to join the formal sector in Nigeria? So either outside investors don't want to come in. If they came in, it would be in the formal sector. And informal sector people in Nigeria don't want to join the formal sector. Why is that? Because the formal sector in Nigeria is still too expensive and still too complex. So it's worrisome when we raise taxes, when we create new levies, when we have so many MDAs, because each of those adds cost and complexity. So if there was one word I would signal to that I think we should all have in our minds to crowd in private capital is simplicity.
Benro, the Mr. President spoke about this finance bill, which will be part of tax incentives for investment in infrastructure and in the capital market. What do you think Mr. President was talking about?
Yeah, so it spoke to a number of issues from the tax side, beyond the Petroleum Industry Bill and the VAT Amendment Act. He actually also spoke about the infrastructure tax credit, which is part of government focus to bridge the revenue gap. And I think we actually need to do a lot more of that. We just need to come to a term with the fact that we're not able to, at the current pace of things, we're not able to generate revenue from government-only sources to be able to defray the cost of governance or to deliver the infrastructure. So what government is doing is to say, how can we put incentive on the table and bring in private capital to be able to assist, in delivering all of these projects. So the president did mention that he's approved, I think, about 19, if I pick the number correctly, from the budget speech, for roads and bridges and all of that, and the first set of tax credit is already been processed. So we need to have a lot more of that and ensure that the enabling environment demonstrates our appetite and hunger and desire to bring in private capital, which seems sometimes to run as though we're comfortable, we have all of the money, and we don't care if investors, whether foreign or local, participate in running this economy. We need to show a lot more willingness and openness to make the environment completely very easy. Let's eliminate all of the tensions that come from the aggression of the revenue agencies and all of that. There must be some collaboration with what government is doing on the fiscal side to ensure that we continue to drive this economy forward.
Andrew, where's the monetary side in this entire discussion?
Well, I think that sometimes too much attention is paid to the monetary side. I mean, the central bank here runs very well. It's very technical. It knows what it's doing. But it's a little bit like the analogy I would use is the central bank governor and his team are the race car driver. But if they're driving a car from the 1950s, they're not competitive in the race. It's up to the legislature and the executive arm to build the race car. And then I have no doubt that the structures we have, central bank structures, can drive the race car just fine. But whether or not the MPC raises rates 0.5% or lowers than 0.5% is not going to fix our problems.
Let's get back to Abuja Studios and ask Eze Oyepere, who is the lead director at the Center for Social Justice. Mr. President says that there will be all the MDAs are asked not to include new projects in the 2020 budget, only the ones that are existing, fix them. And some folks have said already on social media, on Twitter, and says we could run a maintenance budget for the next few years and we'll be good. Get done with what we have. Don't start new projects. Do you think this will resolve some of the problem we have with budget padding and things like that, because there are new projects for anyone to put money on? What's your take?
In the past, we've even canvassed for what is called a project implementation and continuity at PICA, in the sense that until you finish the projects you have, in fact, the money available now cannot even finish the projects that are existing in the next 2 to 3 years. So why introduce new projects? What we've had has led to project abandonment. It led to a situation where there will be 1,000 projects, say 1,000 road projects in the budget, but the money available can only do maybe 50 to 60. So why don't we have a scenario where we concentrate on the first 50, 60, finish them, and then before starting new ones? One of my friends had likened it to a situation where somebody had 10 plots of land, but he has only money that can finish constructing a duplex each on 2 of them. Instead of finishing constructing the duplex, maybe leaving one and let one out, he starts a foundation on the 10 and gets stuck at the DPC level. He doesn't have a house completed and nothing is done and he has no money to continue. So that's the kind of thing we are doing in Nigeria. But I'm afraid also for the budget, because if you look at the indicators, in 2019 we are told as at the half year we only realized 58% of the projected revenue, meaning that we had a negative variance of 42%. And that has been the variance in previous years as well. So if we continue budgeting like this, where the forecasts are not necessarily based on empirical evidence, simply that we want to collect more money, at the end of the day we have 30, 40, 50% variance. There is no way we can implement this budget. So that's why I'm also a little bit happy that the president has said that we need to review our tech from the production sharing agreements with international oil companies. But if you look at the law enabling us to do that, it did not say we have to amend the existing law. It simply said that we have to renegotiate with these companies. So the idea that until you enact a new legislation, you cannot renegotiate those terms is not tenable. I believe that the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, the NNPC, and the presidency should set machinery in motion to be able to renegotiate those terms. Again, I look at even the MTF itself. He made projection for the realization of 200 billion naira from stamp duties. Now, these stamp duties, they've been collecting it for the past 5, 6, 7 years. Many of us have sent FYI requests to say, where is this money going? And they've been telling us stories and fables. Suddenly, you have simply 200 billion naira for 2020. What has happened to the money that they've been collecting in previous years? Where is the money? They need to account for it. They need to tell Nigerians where it is. And I'm also insisting that 200 billion from the volume of stamp duties we do every day, even in my little organization, I know how much we do in a year, cannot be a realistic estimate. We need to collect not less than 1 trillion naira from stamp duties. So that particular revenue source is grossly underrated and undervalued. So I believe that if the leakages are plugged, in terms of even the kind of income that comes to some of these state-owned companies, government agencies, you know, profits that they make that they are not properly remitting to Treasury, that we have a lot more money to be able to implement the budget.
I'm interested, thank you, Eze, but I'm interested in the ERGP and the new National Development Plan that Mr. President talked about. So I'm going to get this conversation back here. We'll get back to you, Tafra in Abuja in a bit, but let me ask Yomi Olugbenro of Deloitte here. When we talk about a National Development Plan, it looks like Mr. President is alluding to the fact that ERGP is going to be rested, is getting to the end of his tenure. It looks like it hasn't bite as much as Mr. President perhaps would want. So he thinks he wants more of a medium to long-term development plan in place. Do you think this is the way to go?
No, absolutely the right way to go. So you remember that ERGP was an intervention development plan on the back of the recession.
2016.
Exactly. So we went into recession 2015, 2016, and we needed to have a recovery and growth plan. And ERGP came in as a medium rolling plan. So now that we're getting out of this current administration, by the time this current administration is completely over, I think what the country needs, it's more of a medium to long-term plan where we could return back to, the type of the first national development plan that we had in the country, so that successive administration can build on, what each prior administration did. So I'm delighted to hear that from the president.
Andrew, what's your take on the ERGP and what Mr. President hinted about, that the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning would have to come up with another national development plan?
No, I think we need that. I guess what I would like to say, along with what I've been saying on this program, is ERGP was 200 pages. Again, it had a high level of complexity, many new intervention programs. And we've been saying for some time, look, development's going to happen at the state and zonal level. States need to get on with it. And obviously we're seeing lots of states, Kaduna State, Edo State, Oyo State, Ogun are ones I'm familiar with, where the governors are really pushing their agenda, their development agenda in a positive way. So I think this next plan, and the Vice President, very interesting, I had not heard this out of the federal government, but it was reported maybe yesterday, the Vice President came out and said the states need to have more responsibility for the development. So I would like to see a plan come out in the next round that's simpler and makes it clear to the governors that actually a lot of the responsibility needs to reside with the states. Now, of course, if they have the responsibility, we also need to think through what powers the states have versus which are restricted items for the federal government. And again, if reported accurately, His Excellency, the Vice President, said that the other day.
Yeah, Mr. President says the states will get more of the VAT, so they should invest more in education, in healthcare and all of that. So let's put this to Abraham in Abuja. What more would you like to see from the subnationals when you talk about the states? Mr. President spoke about a new finance bill that will support SMEs on the ease of doing business. What would you like to see more in this area done by the government for and on behalf of the states?
Thank you again, Bosi Omofai. What I'd like to see from the states, it's important that we keep track of the history of Nigeria's economic development. If you recall, at the time where there was a time Nigeria's anchor plan was the needs 1 and needs 2, National Economic Empowerment and Development Strategy 1 and 2. During that era, you have the states also have the SEEDS, State Economic Empowerment Development Scheme, and then the local governments also had Local Government Economic Empowerment and Development Scheme. But since the president came up with the 2017-2020 ERGP, we did not see the states replicate state ERGP or local government ERGP. Just like Jide said there, the intervention plan for 2016 was the strategic implementation plan. But for 2017 to 2020, it was deliberate ERGP planning. And this ERGP planning, Bosin, has mapped out specific strategies for priority sectors for which this government wants to achieve key records. So for states not to have their own equivalent of the ERGP and for local government to do likewise, that would be, it will reflect like the economy in terms of political planning is not in sync. The ERGP also have clear objectives for SMEs, you know, for job creation and for inclusive plans generally. So I would like to see states buy into that and to have their own version of this key plan. Then, just to emphasize, in as much as the president emphasized in his speech that he wants to sustain the ARGP into a long-term development plan, let's not forget, Nigeria does not exist in isolation. We have the sustainable development goals that at the moment serves as a shadow, as a dummy, perhaps a long-term guide for Nigeria's long-term development plan. So what we'd like to see in terms of global consistency is the budget buying into the ERGP and the ERGP buying into some aspect of the SDGs. Yes, it is good to own our own development plan, but we still cannot have a radical deviation from the goals in terms of what what our long-term plan will say in terms of our long-term plan basically has to be in sync with the SDGs. So it is important to see the states follow up on ERGP and also have their own micro-level key performance indicators to track the attainment of the 17 SDGs while we await the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning to come up with some alternative for the ERGP going forward.
Okay, thank you. We'll talk about how to implement this budget within the minutes left on the show. But gentlemen, we need to talk about the headline metrics as Mr. President presented them, the production target, oil price target, headline figure, the deficit in the budget, the capital expenditure, and the revenue, so and the exchange rate, and the GDP outlook, which the finance budget and National Planning Minister talked about 3% earlier, and we look at about 1.9% today. And what Mr. President talked about the global average and the warnings from the World Bank and the IMF and the OECD about a slowing down in the global economy. Andrew, what do you see here? Do you think our projections and these headline metrics has been outlined are really in order and in tune with the rest of the world?
I'm very concerned about the global economy. I mean, we're getting almost daily news of how rapidly it's decelerating in China. Yesterday there was news out about German industrial production, which has shrunk for, I think, almost 2 years, every month for 2 years in a row. I think $57 oil benchmark may be optimistic. I think that the growth rate outside of Nigeria is going to be revised down. So I think we should be prepared for a world in which nothing outside of Nigeria or Africa is going to help the Nigerian or African economies. The only people that can help the Nigerian economy are Nigerians.
Wally, what do you think?
Well, I share similar sentiment, yes. But I must recognize that between the 2019 assumptions and 2020, which seems to have a little bit of moderated expectation. So last year's budget was based on a $60 to the barrel, and now it's per barrel rather. Now it's 57. Also, in terms of daily crude production, I think it was 2.3 million barrels per day that was expected in the current year's budget. Now that's been reduced slightly to about 2.18. The question I will ask is, from the budget speech, I didn't quite hear anything particularly that is aimed at bridging the fall in the daily crude production. The president alluded to the fact that there have been some relative stability within the zone. So why didn't we attain the 2.3? So I think we need to spend a lot more analyzing some of these assumptions and not just to do a little bit of moderation that appeals to the sentiment of people. It was 2.3 million in 2018, and you didn't meet it. Therefore, let's lower it a little so that the agitation can be reduced. I think we actually need to hear a lot more of what's happening, why are the production targets not being met, so that everybody can be kept along. But I'm at least relatively satisfied with the fact that there has been some bit of moderation in our expectation for 2020.
Okay, so let's get back to Abuja Studios for our guests to give us some of their words in terms of Tafra Abraham. What's your final take on this budget as we move forward? The President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, says, look, everyone will have to come forward as far as the MDAs are concerned this month, get the job defended. There'll be no extension. November, the Assembly will get their job done. They want to pass this budget unfailingly in December.
Oh, okay. Thank you again, Bosin. initially when the Senate President, Senator Lawan, gave the introductory speech, basically his message was to say, we're on the same page, we're in partnership. But as the Speaker concluded with the remark, my joy was complete because he emphasized that the National Assembly has the power of the purse. The power of the purse for which that the National Assembly has cannot be reduced into being an appendage. And I'm happy with the speech of the Speaker emphasizing that the National Assembly will sit up in terms of ensuring that transparency and commitment to duty in terms of scrutinizing the proposal, the intent, the budget as submitted or as laid by the President today is just an intent of what the executive seeks to do. The power of the purse ultimately resides with the National Assembly. But already, I'm happy with the process because we can see that there are signals that the National Assembly will work in collaboration with the executive to ensure that the proposed budget and in terms of everything that has to do with the complete process of the budget cycle, from preparation to enactment to implementation to oversight or audit, if you may, I'm definitely sure that with the commitment the Ninth Assembly has in terms of working at equilibrium with the President, I see the budget being passed by December. But it is important to ensure that the committees, because the committee is the engine room of the National Assembly, as emphasized by the Speaker, go to work and ensure that every proposal is scrutinized. The Presidency must also give heads of MDAs a heads-up call to ensure that they honor invitation this time around. There should be no excuses when committees of National Assembly call on their counterparts on the executive side to come for budget defense. Well, they have to take it serious.
Tafa Abraham, this is one one issue that was a major devil in the works for the 2019 appropriations. Today is the 8th of October. We'll see how that works. Let's get back here. Andrew, in terms of getting this budget done, do you think this timeline set by the President of the Senate for the budget considerations, all the MDAs to turn up, the central bank, whoever to be there, do you think this can be done before the end of this month? Do you think it's realistic?
Well, I think if the executive branch behaves properly, and I mean it is the legislative branch that controls the purse strings, they need to show up and have the meetings, have the inquiry from the legislative branch, and they need to do that. And what we heard from the President was that in the cases where they don't cooperate, the MDA heads will be held accountable. So we need to see that.
Yummy.
Yeah, so where there's a will, there's a way. So we have 3 months or thereabouts to get all the MDAs to come defend their budget. So the National Assembly is saying we're open. We want to do this in October, and by November we want to go back to...
Do you think the invite should go out as early as today, before the end of today's business?
No, I will expect the invite to be out already. So I will expect all MDAs to already have timetables for... Because remember, the Senate President said this is partnership, so we're working together. So they understand that the President is coming to make the presentation today, so there should already be the news out there for when each of the ministries are supposed to have their turn at the Assembly.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up with our Abuja studios. Eze Onyekpere, you have the final 1 minute of your commenting to this budget conversation.
Well, the important thing in this budget is not just the figures that you have, it's the political will to implement it. And like I did point out earlier, if you look at the previous trajectory of the revenue forecast and what actually comes in, you know that there is a lot of challenges. So if the right political will is there, and then necessary steps are taken to ensure that not just the money from the government alone, fundamental restructuring of the economy in such a way that we draw in private capital, and then the idea of removing quite a good number of things from the exclusive legislative list. I don't see the reason why the federal government alone should be taking control or investing in the power sector, why the federal government alone should also be interested in the railways, why they cannot bring in state governments and others to come in. So going forward, we're expecting a situation where that fundamental restructuring will be there so that we can leverage on the competencies and other capital that is not necessarily public capital and grow the economy.
Thank you so much for your contributions. Let's ask Tafa Abraham, what's your final take on this budget presentation?
Yeah, my final take, I'm happy with the emphasis given on the revenue side. Because budget is two wings, revenue and expenditure. So I will lend my voice to support the call to amend the production sharing contract, because Section 16 of that act provides that once the price of crude oil goes above $20, there's need to revisit. But it does not state clearly at what point, for how long will the price be above $20 before it will be revised. Right from the 70s, the crude oil price have gone above $20. In 80s, it went above $20. But all that while, it wasn't amended. But since the return to democracy from 1999 to date, it has stayed well above $20. So I think it's high time to actually amend the production sharing contract. So I think, in my opinion, the president, it's a nice move for the president to push that act to the National Assembly to amend. I look forward to the National Assembly using its think tank agency, the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, to do a lot of committee work in terms of budget hearing analysis and defense when it comes, so that we can all go back to happy days of January 1st to December 31st budget cycle.
Tafa Abraham, thank you so much. And Eze Onyekore from Abuja Studios, thank you very much. We appreciate your being part of the program today. Now let's wrap this up here in Lagos with Andrew Nevin and Yomi Olugbenro. The final lap. Andrew, what should Nigerians expect or prepare for in the year 2020 with this budget?
Well, I think it was widely reported today that yesterday at the National Economic Summit Group Summit in Abuja, that the Emir of Kano and Mr. Dangote came out and said, we're running out of time. We need to make structural changes. So I think that the budget is presented, the messages that were presented, the cooperation between the legislative and the executive branch are all very positive. We need to overlay that with some structural changes that are going to bring in the private capital and really get us up to the growth.
What should Nigerians prepare for? Higher electricity bill, removal of subsidy?
I think we've come out and wanted the subsidy removed. We wanted electricity cost-reflective tariff. I mean, the reality is Nigeria can no longer subsidize these things, and also cannot grow when it subsidizes these things. That's the problem. So we need to be more prosperous in Nigeria, and we're only going to get more prosperous if we attract private capital, and it's only going to come in if it's clear how it can prosper the private capital. So we need some structural changes.
Yomi Olugbenro, what do you think Nigerians should prepare for in the new year? I'm sure a higher VAT has come to stay, but we still have minimum wage to deal with.
Well, that's correct. I think beyond what the Nigerians should prepare for, I think my call would probably be to the government first. I think the entire citizen must realize that whatever is the measure of excitement we have today from the presentation of the budget is still a statement of intention. So we need to get this implemented. And for this budget to be implemented, we need to make the money. We need to generate revenue. So government needs to enlist the support of the citizen by showing more transparency, more accountability, responding to the yearnings of the business community, so that there can be some bit of handshake on both sides to ensuring that we deliver on this number.
A number of state governments would have to roll out their 2020 budget. Andrew, what would you like to see? Would you like to see a bit more realistic numbers from state governments like we've seen from the federal government?
Absolutely. We always want to see realistic numbers. There's no point in the governor lying to himself or to him or himself, I guess, or to the people of the state on that. But as it was said a little earlier, I'm very heartened because I think there are more and more governors that are doing the right thing for their state. So if the federal government and the state governments can work together, we are going to get to the type of inclusive growth that we need in this country.
Thank you, gentlemen. Andrew Nevin, senior partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Thank you very much for coming. And Yomi Olugbenro, partner and West Africa tax lead at Deloitte Nigeria. Gentlemen, we appreciate you being here, as well as guests at our Abuja studio for this very special budget 2020 presentation by President Buhari to the National Assembly. We thank our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I am Boston Namafaye, and I'll see you next time.